位，我現在宣布會議。
Members, I declare the meeting open, so please take your seat. So please get settled, and I would like to start the meeting as soon as possible.
Okay.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome the representatives from the administration as well as representatives from different deputations and individuals coming to this hearing. This is a special meeting, and this is about the special measures to address issues arising from the drop in secondary student population. Please put on the headset and please choose the right channel. Channel 0 for the floor, Channel 1 Cantonese, Channel 2 English. Altogether, 73 deputations and individuals are attending the meeting, and there will be 2 sessions. The Secretariat has already forwarded the submissions sent from you to our members and the administration. Deputations and individuals, please note that the written submissions as well as your verbal submissions will not be covered by the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance. I know we have a very tight timetable. I'll ask the Secretary for Education to briefly introduce the paper to us, and then I will invite you to speak one after another. We do have a lot of speakers today, so you will be confined to 2 minutes each. When the bell is rung, then please stop speaking. Please be concise. If you have further to add, please provide the additional points in a written form. Secretary, please keep your speech brief. Mr. Chairman, good morning, members. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Well, according to our understanding, in the year 2017-2018, the number of students in secondary schools will be brought to the current level. So the drop in the student population in secondary education is only a temporary one. So we need a timely and appropriate response. We should avoid long-term and structural changes that are not flexible. In this transitional period, we will be working together with the educational sector to make sure that schools can have development, there will be stability in the teaching force. We have a clear objective. We keep the teachers, keep the teaching posts, we'll keep our strength. I'm sure this is our consensus. We're faced with the drop in secondary 1 student population. In year 0809, we already tried our best to reduce the number of students allocated to each class. It was cut from 38 to the current 34. In 2010, we have launched the voluntary optimization of class structure scheme. For schools operating 5 classes or more, they may cut the number of classes by 1. And we have gathered the experience, and we do understand that parents are worried that they may have a smaller chance of sending their children to schools of their choice. And I do understand that the imbalance in the supply and demand of school places in certain districts may get serious, and students will be asked to go across districts to go to school. So we can't resort to this lightly. And we understand that the drop will only be there for a few years. So first of all, we should adopt more focused measures. And in fact, if you turn to paragraph 5 of the paper, in fact, for the case in 2013-14, it will be similar to what happened in 0809. 5,000 students less, and yet there were only 34 classes fewer. Secretary, please keep your speech brief. Yes, I will. In fact, the number of students in each class has been cut from 38 to 34, and it will become 25. So I really hope that we can reiterate our point, and our overriding principle is to keep the schools, keep the teaching posts, and we keep our strength. I hope that the program can gather your acceptance, and I'm willing to listen to your further views so that we can achieve the overall objectives and we can join hands to tie over the transitional period. Thank you, Secretary. I would like to give the floor to the first speaker, Mr. Ho. Now, over 100 school principals are absent from school, from the school assemblies, absent from the morning reading session, and I have to give up my teaching work this morning. I would like to talk about a few points arising from an article in the newspaper. Yes, I think we can keep the teachers. In fact, this bureau has already applied for $700 million. In fact, it means that over 400 classes will be cut if we want to allow teachers to retire early. 400 classes that will give us 100 schools being the number to be affected. Now, teachers have been working hard for the schools, and they have been working for 10 to 14 years with very good experience in management. Why should we be resorting to early retirement? Why can't we adopt the flexibility in our alliance proposal? We don't want to have something across the board. We want to be flexible with increases and decreases. It is said that we haven't elaborated on the details. Well, in fact, if the Bureau is to sit down together with the Alliance to have a meeting, I'm sure, according to our proposal, even when there is an increase in student population, our plan can accommodate that. So it is not across the board in flexibility. Now, we talked about reducing the number of classes. In the past, Mr. Lee had a discussion with the secretary. We were told that we can reduce the number of students per class, 1 per year. I think we have been given this promise by the former SE Secretary for Education. Please come back to this proposal. Thank you. The second one, Mr. Chick. Mr. Chairman, I think we have a golden opportunity to improve teaching. When we have a drop in student population, we don't need to add resources, and still we can have small class teaching. I think it is very clear. At the same time, I want to point out today that for the Education Bureau, when it comes to the calculation of the establishment, 2 mistakes have been committed. First of all, for the subsidies given to schools in relation to manpower, at first they looked at the number of students per class, and on that basis, you can have the number of classes to be operated and then the number of teachers that you may recruit. So then the student population in each class, that's the class to student ratio, and then you get the class to teacher ratio. In fact, all along, the Education Bureau has been adopting the class to student ratio as the basis of analysis. But I think they have ignored one very important point. First of all, the teachers' workload. Second, the students' workload. You can't just look at the class hours of a teacher. They have to prepare for classes, they have to mark the homework, and they have to make preparations. In fact, this is entirely ignored by the Education Bureau. So with the drop of student population, we have an opportunity to address this anomaly. And then students' learning. We have been having integrated education, but then students get 3/4 less resources than when students study at a main special school. Teachers have to work harder and students also suffer. How are we going to address this point? We should look at the number of students. We should also look at their learning needs. That's very important. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, speaker is off mic. 2 minutes. 2 minutes is indeed too short a period of time, like what Mr. Chick has been doing. I think he didn't have time to share with us some very in-depth observations. Yes, Sid, I do understand your point, but then we have got 73 deputations and or individuals. If we want to finish the meeting by 12:30, we can only work out such a time limit. If there are further views, we do welcome something in writing. They have only got 2 minutes. They can never go into the crux of the matter. There won't be meaningful discussion. I would rather have an additional meeting. Well, if you want to extend the time limit, then we can't accommodate all the 73 of them. If we have 1 more minute each, then a dozen of them can't have the chance to speak. And if you extend it even further, then we can only accommodate half of them. This is unprecedented because we've got 187 deputations of individuals wishing to speak. And then for the venue, we do have a House Committee meeting this afternoon. In the past, we've reviewed the kindergarten education, and we had 4 minutes. It doesn't matter if you give them 4 minutes, then many of them don't have the chance to speak this morning. Ms. Claudia Mo. Well, this is an education panel. We've invited so many from the education sector. I think they have to resort to tongue twisters, something like that, to speak within the time limit. Yes, I can't help it. We would like to accommodate all of them instead of just allowing some of them to speak. In fact, I could have given them 4 minutes, but I'm afraid we can't finish all of them. Can we not have additional sessions? Yes, indeed. For tomorrow, we have a whole day's meeting. Yes, but we can keep on extending the sessions. Yes, I'm also working in the educational sector. For them, it is quite hard on them. And school principals are made to come tomorrow, which is a Saturday. Paul, I agree that 2 minutes would be too short a period of time. They've all come. We don't want some of them to be able to speak, some not. So I would suggest that we cut out this time allotted to members, and then we just give them more time. Yes, indeed, we have allowed 20 minutes for you. So perhaps you shouldn't ask any questions. We'll just have more time for them to speak. All right. So for today, don't ask questions. Yes, Deputy Chair. If we don't allow members to speak, it is not interactive. We don't have a chance even to seek clarification. So please understand this point. So I think questions are needed. I respect your views. If you don't need questions, then we'll give more time to the deputations to speak. Why can't we just put the matter to the vote in a simple way? Extension to 3 minutes and no questions. Those who are in favor, hands up, please. If we can't ask questions. But then the next time we have our second session, we can still have it interactive. Yes, tomorrow. Can we not extend the time? Can we have an extension of 30 minutes so that it's better? In fact, I have in mind, I've prepared for extending the time. Extend it to 1 p.m. then. I haven't made any announcement. Let's not waste time. So all members would refrain from asking questions. They will each have 3 minutes. All right? For the two who have spoken, I'm sorry about that. Sacrifice. So I'll rather go on with the others. All right? The third one, Miss Men.
Now, several questions. First, about figures. The Education Bureau says that no schools will be killed, and if the criterion for approving excellent class is set at 26 per 2 classes, only 5 schools will have to be closed down. And I want to ask the Education Bureau, in the coming 3 years, how many secondary schools will, because of under-enrollment, have their classes reduced from 4 to 3 or even 2? And how many secondary schools are expected to cut the classes from 3 to 2 or even 1 class? And how many and where will these secondary schools be? And about the transfer of teaching experience and the loss of talents. Over the past few years, teachers have had a hard time. They needed to take care of the cohort, and also students had to take part in the first DSE, and the schools have just started reviewing the new system. And over the past few years, teachers had to further their studies, which were subsidized by the government. Several years later, because of the increase of population, the government, nevertheless, is rolling out the early retirement scheme with abundant resources allocated. However, the government have not considered the 3-to-1 option to gradually reduce the number of students, so that these teachers who received subsidy in furthering their studies could not further contribute to the sector, and this is unreasonable. So for the loss of these teachers who received subsidy in their further studies, have the government considered the situation? Have teachers been received the respect that they deserve? We often tell teachers that the schools are their second home, but with the instability situation, who is going to suffer? We need to take a people-oriented approach. We need to pour our heart into it. You can't say that, just like operating shops, today we have more staff. Tomorrow, when we don't need so many staff members, we can just lay them off. Next deputation. Education is a very important factor for the quality of our population. Recently, according to a media report, the English standard of our students have declined, and after the DSE, if improvements are needed in many areas of our education, as a knowledge-based economy, it is important for us to consider how we should groom our next generation. As frontline educators, we see the differences between the abilities of different students. Some classes may have 35 to 40 students, and teachers have resorted to different methods of teaching. However, they still may not be able to cater for the needs of different students. Teachers are having a much heavier workload. We wanted to fulfill our mission of education. And after our mission is fulfilled, we need to face the education reform, and we need to prepare students for other learning experiences, because we want to increase the edge of our students. And apart from having good knowledge of the subjects, students also need to have good communication skills and emotional and a good emotional quotient. So teachers are having a very heavy workload, but we're trying our best to cope with the new education policy. So with the declining population, we hope that the Education Bureau can make use of this opportunity to adjust the teacher to student ratio, so that teachers will be able to take care of the disparity of the abilities of students, and to provide suitable help for our students. At present, education seems to be seems to be in chaos, and teachers couldn't focus themselves on teaching students. And I am very worried that 10 or 20 years down the road, what will happen to the quality of our next generation? Thank you. Next, Principal Ms. Li Shuying. Well, it is an undeniable fact that the population will decline in the coming few years. And the Education Bureau has rolled out measures like the early retirement scheme, and also the lowering the criterion for approving classes, for the purpose of stabilizing the education sector. If all these four goals can be fulfilled, what's the purpose of the school principals coming out to speak up today? I just want to talk about the quality of education. The quality of education lies with the quality of teachers. A teacher has to go through at least 3 or more years of training in order to become a good teacher. And during the education reform, a lot of contract teachers were employed. Their teaching posts were not permanent, and in the coming few years, there wouldn't be any chance for these contract teachers to become permanent. And if there is a succession gap, then with the increase in population and the increase in number of classes, I wonder if we will have sufficient number of teachers to cope with the increase in population and the increase in number of classes. For the we don't have population statistics at the moment, and we can easily be accused of making wrong calculations. We don't want to do that. We just look at the frontline educators. After 2010-11, no secondary schools can employ permanent teaching posts. Some young teachers were forced to take up posts like teaching assistants, and this is not what we want to see. And how many schools need to consider the number of teachers to be retired and so on. And this is not transitional. It's irreversible. That's why we need to come out and speak up today. There shouldn't be any difference in terms of goals of the government and the education sector. So apart from considering the government's option, the government should also consider the education sector's proposal and see whether the goal can be better achieved. Next deputation. Chairman, members, fellow teachers. Today in one of the newspapers there is a report about education. It took up 2 pages, so you can see that education has become a widespread concern. I think it is good that we have media support, but the facts should not mislead the public. I'd like to talk about this paragraph saying that the small class teaching method doesn't mean that the number of students per class will be reduced. Well, we understand that liberal studies is a new subject, and we have resources for student grouping within the class, and there are also subjects like physics and history, and now it has 25 students per class. So for these elective subjects, the number of students should be 25 or 28 students. However, for the compulsory subjects like Chinese and English, then the whole class of students attend class together, and that's 38 of them. So how can you improve the quality? And in today's newspaper article, in the first DSE, students have scored poorly in Chinese, English, as well as liberal studies. We understand that there is a reason behind. So my question is, as the decline in population is a good opportunity for us, why aren't we making use of this opportunity to improve or resolve the problem of poor language competency of our students? Some schools, some school councils or school principals may allocate resources for a small class teaching of the English subject, but it only applies to English but not Chinese subject. And for the other compulsory subject, that's mathematics, it's still a challenging situation. So I hope that members could face up to the issue, not to be misled by the newspaper article today, and to support reducing the number of students per class, and to consider the 3-2-1 option, which is a well thought through proposal. Next, Mr. Feng. I'm locally born. I have 3 children who received education in Hong Kong. Of course, I want to see a good education system in Hong Kong. I suggest that in 2013, the number of students per class can be temporarily decreased, say by 3, 2, and 1. And then it can be gradually increased to the existing level, so as to balance demand and supply. I also support the relaxing the criterion for approving S1 classes, and to also encourage teachers to take part in the early retirement scheme. In fact, in the coming few years, under these measures, students will receive better care because under the new academic structure, the NAS, there is still much room for improvement in terms of teaching and examination. And teachers also have to adjust themselves to the new system, and this will also help boost the confidence in students. We all face huge pressure. In the old class structure, for secondary Form 6 and 7, there are 30 students per class. And under the new academic structure, with the school-based assessment, the number of students at present are 36 to 40 per class. And the care for students compared to the time when there were A-level examination is worse. And students all rush to study abroad. And Hong Kong is facing a huge risk of the loss of teachers. If we do not adjust flexibly, teachers will remain worried. They can't focus themselves on teaching students. It's not professional, but schools are forced to cut down classes, and this will affect teachers in terms of the time and effort spent on caring for their students. In fact, to have a rational and reasonable arrangement for students, we should be able to do that. For students suitable for English as the MOI, sorry, your time is up. Next, Mr. Law Tai-fai. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, like many other Hong Kongers, I believe in education. Many people here, including members here, benefited from education in Hong Kong, and it is also an important element in the quality of our population. I believe that it is wrong to say that resources should be saved with declining population. Can we say that in the coming few years we won't face any tightening of our fiscal surplus? And this should not be used as an excuse to take away resources for improving education. Not to mention the fact that we still have huge surplus in our fiscal reserve, and we should improve student or teacher-student ratio and improve the quality of education. This is the society's consensus. And with the advancement of information technology, students are facing more and more temptations. So we should build a good environment, and together with counseling from teachers. One specific response to that is to improve the student-teacher ratio. On the other hand, when our society is talking about teenage problems like sex, morality, and the abuse of drugs, we put all the blame on our education sector. But if we don't give enough support to the education sector, how can we support our teenagers? The education sector is not being greedy. We just hope that similar to the A-level examination before, we should maintain the student-teacher ratio to 30:1. We're not asking for lessening of that ratio. With the society getting more and more complicated, we just want to maintain the ratio at 30 students per 1 teacher. The 3-2-1 option is the education sector's consensus in achieving this purpose. I hope that members and the Education Bureau can take note of this fact and accept the 3-2-1 option. Next, Mr. Chow. Thank you for giving me 3 minutes to speak. As a school principal in Sha-Tin District, I'd like to talk about the history and the impact of education. And in the 1990s, with decrease in student population in Sha-Tin District, we were told not to build new schools in Sha-Tin District. And after year 2000, we wrote to the LegCo and also the Education Bureau about the decrease in the student population. The Education Bureau should take the responsibility for increasing teachers' workload. Well, the Sha-Tin District used to be called the disaster district in terms of student intake. I have been approached by journalists as well. The Education Bureau had erred in their planning, and it's very unfair. And this time round, the Education Bureau's proposal may harm the territory as a whole. We discussed the Bureau's proposal, but we think that its effectiveness is questionable. In 2008, as an administrative measure, the number of students would be decreased by 2 per year until down to 34 students per class. And then we were told to discuss the voluntary optimization of class structure scheme. So in fact, the Bureau's proposal has largely departed from the sector's proposal. Why doesn't the Bureau work together with the sector? School principals should attend morning assemblies. They should meet with teachers and students or to inspect classes. But instead, school principals have come to speak because they need to fight the corners. Well, I received some messages last night from teachers saying that I should be reassured. There won't be any problem. But we learn from experience that the education sector has to bear the brunt because of the Education Bureau's blunders. Next deputation. Well, according to this feature article today, the Education Bureau has still yet to consider the education sector's proposal. A government says that they may introduce new measures and step up efforts. I'd like to quote some figures about Yuen Long District. According to the census in 2011, the student population in Yuen Long District was just 12.7%. For Central and Western District, it got the highest percentage of 36. The average figure was just 18%. Yuen Long has the lowest median income amongst Hong Kong. As educators in Yuen Long, we believe in education. The fate of families will change if students receive good education. Well, 2.3 teachers would be allocated per class, and there used to be 30 students per class. But under the new academic structure, there are only 2 teachers per class. So the number has reduced, and the number of students per class ranges from 36 to 40, and the disparity has widened. The Yunnan district schools never asked the government to implement small class teaching. We just have a humble request, and that is to make use of the decline in the opportunity in the next 4 years to flexibly decrease the number of students per class, so that in the coming 4 school terms, the students may enjoy the advantages of medium class teaching, so that we can be given the opportunity to groom them to go to university and to bring changes to their families. We dare not ask for a long-term policy. So with the rebound in population, Yunnan district is agreeable to the arrangement of 34 students per allocated to S1 class. I hope that Secretary can give this a serious thought. We're just like a married couple. You give the resources, we make the effort. We all work towards the interest of our children, especially the children and the families of Yunnan and Kwai.
Next, Mr. Yun. Thank you. Thank you for increasing our speaking time by 50%. And I would like to talk about the targeted measures of the Education Bureau. There are only 2 points. One is to lower the criterion for approving S1 classes, and also lowering the number of students per class. The objective is to reduce the chance of school closure and to extend the buy time for them. But exactly because of these 2 measures, there are a lot of drawbacks. First, there is a surplus teacher, and 2, there is also an adverse impact on the teaching team and mismatching. But I don't have time to elaborate on them. The side effects has caused unrest in the education sector and serious impact in our sector. And in turn, students are affected. All these are side effects. So given the situation, I would like to say that if we are to do well, the simplest way is to rely more than these 2 points. Just introduce more measures to avoid or prevent the side effects. Just now, you also talk about preserving schools and teaching posts. These are very attractive phrases. Say, for example, preserving schools, preserving your ability, preserving teaching posts, and stabilize the team. And this will only slightly cushion the schools, but the effect are all side effects. All side effects arisen from the 2 measures, the 2 targeted measures I've just mentioned, because we have to reduce number of teachers, and this will in turn undermine our teaching ability, cause instability in our teaching team, and hurt our students. All these are side effects. And I would also like to say that in the press today, there is some mention about enhancing the effort. Frontline teachers are not asking the Bureau to enhance its efforts. And when it comes to data, I would like to say something. This morning, there are over 200 school principals announcing a statement. This itself is data. There are over 150 principals attending panel meetings today and tomorrow. That is a very important figure, a very prominent figure. So I ask the Bureau to analyze the figure and data and to take into account our enthusiasm and to dispel the conflict in the mitigation measure and to come up with a comprehensive plan to improve our secondary education. Next, Mr. Lin Zhanbang. Good morning. I hope all of you will will use the 3-2-1 proposal and to aim at 30 students per class. Starting from 2008, we have adopted the small class teaching. This year, we have got resources for 27 classes, and we have 32 classes in the whole school. And we make good use of sponsorship and engage more than about a dozen additional schools to implement the NSS. With the use of small classes, there are diversified teaching and learning. Our students are performing better and better in public examination. Some students told me that they've been studying in our school. What impressed them was the small class teaching because they were well taken care of by teachers. So we ask the government to reduce the number of students in each class so that students will be well taken care of and they can have an all-round education. Earlier, some principals said to me that the Education Bureau said that all in all, only 10 schools will be closed. In Shatin, there are more than 10 primary schools that have closed. There is a decreasing student population for primary school, and this in turn hinder the development of schools. If the school preservation arrangements are effective, that means over 100 secondary schools will have their classes reduced, and about 30 to 40% of people will be affected, and everyone will fear. Well, we have to chase after the NSS review and also the national education. Over 200 principals came out today to announce a statement which is in itself unprecedented. Teachers and students and principals asked to come out together to the government headquarters to fight for what they want. So I hope the administration will take on board the 3-2-1 proposal so that principals and students can focus on teaching, so that teaching will become once again the core of education. Next, Ms. Liu Hong. Good morning. I have mixed feelings attending here. This morning, close to 300 principals left their schools to go to the Legislative building. What we want to preserve our students, preserve our teaching team. What's more important is to preserve the quality of our education. We are facing a drastic decrease in student population. We sense the crisis. A lot of school sponsors and principals have been trying to come up with solutions and proposals because we all have the same goal. We want to find a way out for our education sector. But in some areas, like Tai-fai, because of the aging population and development in neighboring areas, primary schools have left their school net, and there are also problems with planning. And we have surplus places in secondary schools, and some schools have to close. I don't know what the pace will be in the coming few years. For schools in certain areas, they want to find a way out for themselves. But very often, because there is no specific data given by the administration, and they give you prevaricated answers, so schools are in the dark when they try to find the way out. So whose responsibility is it? Well, I am a chairman of a principal association in my district, but I have no solution. And I think that we should put the interest of our students in the first place. Solution should not undermine education quality. All options should preserve the special characteristics of schools to take into account the needs of students. We very much identify the two measures that should go in tandem, and I hope the administration will take them on board. We urge the administration to seriously turn this crisis into an opportunity and to frankly explain to us the specific data of demand and supply, and to maintain a two-way exchange with schools, and to, in a transparent way and with sincerity, come up with a basket of solution. More importantly, to let principals to go back to their schools to focus on school development, and let our teachers focus on teaching, and to improve secondary school education. Thank you. Next, Mr. Poon Seng-gai. I'm very concerned about the school environment and the teaching environment. A lot of teachers have been working very hard on the DSE and also fighting for the survival of the school. This is not healthy in the education sector. Teachers have a lot of work to do. Apart from teaching, they are worried about the survival of the school. They are concerned if the school will be, whether the school will be closed. So they can't focus on teaching. And in the long run, this will adversely affect the school environment and also quality of teaching. And very often, we are asked to take into account differences in the ability of students. Yes, that is true that different students need different schools. And if teachers can't focus on teaching, for some lower band schools, and if there are no schools that takes care of differences in students, then is it healthy for the education sector? If we all share the same goal, which is stability, then why don't you accept our upward-downward adjustment mechanism? Well, if we reduce today, it doesn't mean that we won't agree increasing places tomorrow. So how can you help teachers to focus on teaching? And don't neglect the choice of students and confusion that may face parents. You said there are 200 to 300 principals outside, in LegCo. We should be in school. I myself should be in school. We have a lot of things to do. And we have made use of the whole morning to come here. This is luxurious for us. Are we talking about stability here? I hope the Education Bureau will seriously consider our upward-downward adjustment mechanism. In my teaching team, there are lots of young teachers. They are on contract terms. They are very concerned about the certainty of their job. We want to attract a young blood into the Education Bureau. That is very important. We have attracted quality teaching staff, but I was told, but they say to me that the principal can't even tell them where they will stay in the next year. How can you give them certainty? How can you in turn benefit our next generation? Next, Mr. Chun-yau. Good morning. Every time I think about the secondary school's phase in the coming few years, then I have an unpleasant experience or feeling that came up. Shortly before, there was a wave of school closures for primary schools. We are taking in primary students, of which the population is shrinking. We notice a marked difference. They are lackluster. They feel abandoned. It's not surprising that they feel like this because they've gone through a number of years in their school, seeing the teachers that care for them leaving. They see the number of students in the school decreasing. Youngsters should have hope in their future, but what they see instead is a future without hope. I think this has an adverse impact on their development. We're talking about secondary schools aging between 12 to 18. The 6 years is the golden year in their lives. In the coming 4 years, this group of students, amounting to over 10,000, will face similar difficulties under the current policy of the Education Bureau. They will have a tough upgrowing. If students come to me asking me why they have to experience that, I'm afraid I don't have the answer. Thank you. Next, Mr. Leung Kok-gai. Thank you. I will ask you to look at paragraph 25 on page 8 of the Education Bureau's paper. It says that a number of students have arrange their 3 classes of students into 4 to 5 groups according to students' ability, and there may be different number of groups at different levels. If we are to increase the effectiveness of teaching, an important element is to take care of the difference in students' ability and teach accordingly. But the major obstacle is there are too many students in the class. The current strategy of schools is to, on our own accord, reduce the number. Say, for example, we're given 4 classes. We will divide them into 5 to 6 groups. I want to ask legislators, do you know where the additional resources come from? Some principals said that they have commercial sponsorship. But very often, it's our teachers who willingly increase their workload and teach a few more sessions. We want to teach our students well, and they work to the ground. But the administration turn the blind eye. They're bullying students. Is it because teachers are willing? That's why the administration is not doing anything? What does the administration want from us teachers? How long do they want it to last? I ask you to consider this. 2, give teachers what they deserve, to seize the opportunity of a decreasing student population and consider proposals floated by the sector to implement small class quality and to implement quality education. Thank you. Next, Mr. Ngao Yong-song-fan. Good morning. I have mixed feelings today. I have had some unpleasant tussle with the Education Bureau. I always think that the education sector is, in fact, quite obedient. And very often we will compliment the policies of the Education Bureau. But what results? In islands district, we've just been made aware that we are the poorest district in the territory. We have a very low socio-economic status. We are aware that our children face a lot of problems. They have family problems, parents being unemployed, there is abuse, violence. They have encountered great difficulties in their learning. And it's not because they're born with such difficulties. It's because they have very little family support. The difference in students' ability will complicate the matter. They will need extra attention from the students. We've just had the first NSS, first year. We realize that it is a lot more demanding. The school-based assessment and also liberal studies and different learning activities. They are with good intentions, but you need to give them time and room for teachers to actually do what they're supposed to. What is happening now? Teachers work late at night. They come back to the school to give extra lessons during holidays and Saturdays. Students are very busy. So you can imagine. Why will the administration, knowing that there will be a drastic drop in student population, not seize the opportunity to reduce number of students in each class allocated and give something similar to the old A-level, that is 30 students a class, so that teachers can enhance their teaching Why will the administration not consider that? We strongly urge the Education Bureau to consider the proposal floated by the sector, that is to decrease the number of students allocated in each class and to relax the criterion for approving classes. The latter has been approved by the administration, and in the future, when the student population increase, we will face that with the administration together. Next one, Mr. Liu Chin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I think the educational sector has been joining hands to resolve a number of difficulties. First of all, we have reduced the number of students allocated to each S1 class. We also had the voluntary optimization of class structure scheme. So we're able to cope with the drop of student population by 10,000, and we're able to give stability to the sector, stability to the teaching force, and we're able to have a smooth running of the senior secondary education. We must bear this in mind. We can learn from history. And then in the coming 4 years, we're going to have a drop of student population to the tune of 10,000. If we don't cope with it properly, there will be disastrous effects. In fact, in June 2011, we wrote to Michael Tsuen, the former Secretary for Education. We urged the administration to take up both measures I'm going to mention so as to have stability among teachers and in the sector. First of all, we need to be flexible in adjusting the number of students allocated to each S1 class. We need to be flexible. We should increase or decrease the number of students in each class in the light of the population. We should also adjust the criterion for approving S1 classes. We should keep the flexibility. In the past year or so, we have had no discussion at all. Mr. Eddie Ng has already introduced the measure to adjust downwards the criteria for approving S1 classes, but I don't think this is adequate. I don't think we can cope with the drastic drop in the student population. We have to bear the brunt and we have to suffer in terms of the quality of education. This is because we know that over 100 secondary schools will see a continuous drop in the number of classes. They may even have to be closed. Most of the schools have to cope with the widening of the learning variations among students because more are moving up the bands, and we're not able to attract quality students to join the teaching force. There will be gaps, and this is not conducive to our development. Therefore, we very much look forward to the government of Hong Kong to make use of the opportunity of a drop in student population, improve the environment, enhance the quality, work for the interests of the young. Lastly, I hope that the Education Bureau can talk to the sector. We should join hands so that we can identify a win-win situation so as to cope with the drastic drop in student population. Thank you. Thank you. Next one, Mr. Liu. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Ng. Now, I think if we have 26 students per class and then we can have 2 classes, I think we're going to see a great reduction of number of classes. Unsettling the teaching force and the quality of education will suffer. We have a drop in student population. This is because there are more places than demand. The administration is supposed to be responsible for planning and building schools, and yet he has failed to bear in mind the drop in student population and hasn't adjusted the school building program accordingly, and therefore we have a huge surplus of school places. Now, we are going to reduce the class size, cut the number of classes, and teachers will retire. And I don't think they're the right responses. Take my school as an example. It's relatively new. For a period of time, we underwent rapid expansion. We employed quite a large number of young teachers. They worked hard to take care of students, and they had to cope with the heavy workload of the new secondary school education. When we talked about whether we should take part CHAN in the voluntary optimization of class structure scheme. I consulted them for the views for 5 times, and they were positive in their response. But then they told me that it would affect their chance of becoming permanent staff, or they couldn't even become permanent staff. But still, they said yes, because they would like to work for the overall well-being. As long as they could keep their jobs, it would be fine for them, they said. Now, in the coming years, if a school has to deal with the question of surplus teachers, then it means that the school can't make use of the early retirement scheme to deal with teachers that we have got, like in my school. And such teachers would find it difficult to get a new teaching post. Therefore, it means that the number of teachers in the school will fluctuate, and this will affect teacher development, jeopardizing the well-being of students. So please accept the proposal of the Alliance. Please be flexible about the number of students allocated to each class. Make sure that there's stability, enhance quality work for the well-being of the young. Thank you. Next, Mr. Yun Chi Lam. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think the administration is trying to use administrative measures to deal with the problem, the burning problem, but it lacks a long-term vision. I think only vulnerable schools can maintain their operation. But then when parents see that there are only a handful of 13 students in class, they will worry for the eventual killing of the school, so the poor will get poorer. If you extend the early retirement scheme, it means that you can solve the problem for a period of time. But then most teachers to be affected are in vulnerable schools, and yet they are very experienced in teaching those who are not motivated. They have been working silently for the well-being of the society. When they're forced to take early retirement, they will leave the teaching force, and then the professional experience will be rendered useless. I agree with the 3-to-1 proposal of the Alliance, because this is going to deal with the drastic drop in student population, and we can also improve the quality of teaching. After the implementation of the DSE, we all agree that we need to have student-oriented teaching. We should reduce the number of students in a class. This is the golden opportunity. The Education Bureau may be worried that parents don't like the 3-to-1 proposal, but I think the Bureau has to explain to the parents with the number of students dropping, the number of students per band will also decrease. So students will have the same chance of going to schools of their choice. So by having adequate communication, parents will be rational, they won't object blindly. I really hope that the Bureau will be frank in talking to us and negotiate with us to deal with the drop in student population, so that we can have quality education for our students, and this is for the good of our society. Thank you. Next, Mr. Kwok. Tai-fai district is the first district to be dealt a heavy blow in cleaning schools. We used to have 4,700 students. Now it is 1,700 in S1. We used to have 23 schools. Now we're lucky to be able to keep 21. It shows that we're experienced in coping with a drop in student population. Yes, competition is very keen, but then Tai-fai schools are able to get coordinated. We are able to provide quality education to our district. Just now, the Secretary talked about number of directions, and he would allow schools to keep developing, keep the stability of the teaching force, and will keep the strength of the education sector. I think we do share his goals, but then we understand that for the mitigation measures, like having 25 in a class being the approved limit, and having the early retirement scheme extended, they are focused schemes. They are useful, but I don't think they are preventive in nature, and it is not adequate to really stabilize the educational environment. Allow me to cite 2 examples. Say, for example, in the coming 3 or 4 years, if we have another drop of 10,000 students, then it means a surplus of 300 classes, and it will be difficult to absorb the resources. In year 2008 and 9, the Secretary said that again there was a drop of 5,000 students and yet only 34 classes were cut. We really want to know how he arrived at such calculations. And then when you have 76 students who can have 4 classes, on the face of it, it sounds right. Like we have got 200 students, 2 schools, 100 each, then we can keep 4 classes. However, the allocation system is purely based on parental choice. We can't allocate the votes or allocate the students in the way we want. In other words, a school may get the maximum of 136 while the other one has got 64 only. So instead of being able to have 4 classes, there will only be 3. This is what we are worried about. That is, there will be instability. Well, in such an environment, it means that in a few years' time, we are going to have a rebound in the student population, and therefore, both the administration and the education sector must join hands to see through the difficulty, and we need to come up with solutions. So the Tai-fai district has the same proposal like others. That is, in the light of the fluctuations of the S1 student population, we should appropriately adjust the number of students in a class. We should have a plus or minus mechanism. Your time is up. Next, Mr. Kwai. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I speak on behalf of the Association of Secondary School Heads in New Territories. We have 713 principals, and we cover mainstream schools as well as special schools. We have had the painful experience of killing schools, and that went on for 10 years. I live in Tai-fai, and I witnessed the change. There is a drop in student population. It applies to kindergarten, primary schools, and secondary schools. 2 years ago, Mr. Michael Tsing, the Secretary for Education, took the lead to introduce the voluntary optimization of class structure scheme. It's good, and we were able to offset the drop in student population of 6,800. Now we are told that there will be a cut in the number of classes and then cut in the number of students. Now for 2 years we were able to have a moratorium so that we could cope with the DSE. Otherwise, the results of the DSE would be even worse. For the New Territories School Heads Association, we have a consensus, and we do want to have the flexible proposal being implemented, that is 3-2-1. But then the Education Bureau announced a number of measures recently, and I believe that they can only deal with part of the problem. For us and all the school heads associations, we believe that this can only mitigate the problem very lightly, and I don't think we can deal with the unsettling effect. Therefore, I would like to say that for us to resolve the problem, we should have a package of measures, just 1 or 2. We need the consensus. We need diversified action. We suggest that other than the mitigatory measures from the Bureau, other measures should also be considered. For example, please consider seriously once again our proposal of 3-2-1. If it can't be implemented in full, then at least you should only allocate 31 or at most 32 students for each S1 class next year, so as to deal with the problem which is imminent, and we can also reduce the number in a flexible manner, increase it or decrease it according to circumstances. For the repeated places, they should only be kept for repeaters instead of giving them to those who approach you on their own volition, and then we can avoid the musical chair effect. And then if we can have 4 classes of students, then a school should be allowed to run 4 classes in the September head count. And then in S1, I think we still have to consider the possibility of having small class teaching or medium class teaching so as to improve the quality of education. We shouldn't be undoing the foundation that we've built up for so many years. Next, Mr. Ng Chun Hong. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think the education sector has been tying in with the efforts of the Bureau so as to cope with the drop of student population. There was the voluntary optimization of class structure scheme, and also two fewer students have been allocated to each class so as to mitigate the problem of drop of student population. And then for over 200 schools, they were able to get a better learning environment in the light of the measures, and they've got adequate manpower. So we give quality education to students, and we're able to handle the problem of drop in student population. So we were successful in stabilizing the education sector and stabilizing the teaching force, and so we have had quality education. In the coming 4 years, there will be another drastic drop in student population. The sector and the Bureau have to join hands. I think we should support the flexible allocation of students per class. We should also keep the stability of the teaching force. This is an opportunity. We hope that we can have an orderly reduction in the number of students allocated to each class. For 4 years, I hope that the students would get smaller class sizes, like 30 in a class for the advanced level education in the past, so that they can enjoy the advantages of medium class size. And I think in the future, if there should be an increase in student population, we can consider increasing the number of students allocated to each class. Yes, it is worried that parents may not like the proposal. Parents want to send their children to their choice schools, like English medium schools or Band schools. But then, as members have already said, there might be students being sent to a band not of their ability. In other words, EMI schools, Band schools may not be able to get good enough students up to 85% of the total. As a result, EMI schools may not be able to keep the status, and then they have to become CMI schools. Now, for parents who think that they are sending their children to a EMI school, and as a result of the mismatch, and they will be surprised to find that the school cannot be entirely EMI in teaching, and then the parents will be disappointed. Will the Bureau, to satisfy the parents' demand, allow such schools to continue with English as the medium of instruction, despite the mismatch of the band and the student ability? So would you just please the parents, or would you adhere to your professional judgment? Your time is up. Next, Mr. Lee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the CE should be invited to intervene. I think the Education Bureau appears to be disobeying the CE's policy. Now, in fact, we have this 3-to-1 proposal. It is flexible. This is more in line with the CE's platform. There is having 30 to 35 students per class. The Education Bureau shouldn't say that this is misunderstanding on our part. I think 30 to 35 is more in line with the election platform. If we one day have to increase the number of students allocated to each class, we're willing to accept it and consider it. It is said that parents don't like it, but then our proposal has flexibility. Through training schools, they can be flexible. They can have the 1-1-1 alternative scheme. Now, the Bureau is saying that no, because there is financial implication. But then you see, they say that education is investment. You may even want to borrow money to invest. And for Mr. Lam, Franklin Lam, he has also borrowed from a bank to make good his investment. Now, investing in education is better than investment in the property market. This is hard evidence. If Mr. Franklin Lam hasn't received any education in the past, he won't have his achievements today. Now, the CE has found this secretary for us. I think it is clear that he doesn't want to be friendly with us. By not adjusting the class size, he is going against his election platform. It means that he lacks integrity. We should have invited him. We should have pressed for his resignation. I dare not, because some legislators are really fierce, though they were very polite when they stood for the election. So I don't want to invite criticisms from such legislators. CE, please intervene. Don't say that your platform has been intervened. Don't wait for the bomb to be detonated. Next, Mr. Lau Kwang-yip. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ng, Secretary, ladies and gentlemen, school principals, good morning. Hong Kong is a diversified society. Each school has its own positioning and its own features. You can see this from the school profiles. We have got our visions and missions, and they are different from school to school. If you look around the world, this is also true. It is only then can we allow our teachers to take care of students of different abilities, and therefore different schools have their own staff, their own teachers, so as to educate our new generation. In some schools in Hong Kong, yes, indeed, they take care of better performers. But again, there are some secondary schools who are taking care of slow learners or low achievers. And in this way, we are able to have diversity. Such a division of labor means that we can't have perfect substitutes, because teachers and staff members working in different schools have to accumulate experience before they can take care of students of a particular ability group. I think there will be students being sent to the wrong band if you don't follow our proposal, and then the diversity of our educational sector will become very much standardized, like the shopping malls in Hong Kong. I don't think we can merge schools or allow students to go upward in terms of banding to solve the problem. And for a class structure of having less than 4 classes means that we can't have a broad and diversified and balanced senior secondary curriculum. Now, education is for the long term. Now we see a change in the population, and we are not able to meet our long-term goals. It is regrettable. So I hope that legislators and the Bureau can further consider being flexible about the number of students to be allocated to each class.
Next, Mr. Yim Chi-sing. Chairman, members, school principals, good morning. Having heard Mr. Lee's words, a poem came to my mind, and we all come from the same root. Why should we grill each other? First of all, I support the alliance declaration made on the 31st of October to grasp opportunities to continuously fine-tuning the secondary school education, so as to avoid the huge impact on the education sector. On the radio program, A Letter to Hong Kong, I talked about the undeniable fact of the declining student population, and the Alliance came up with different options, for example, to recognize the value and contribution of different types of schools, and to plan for different to plan according to districts to cater for different needs of students, and to encourage schools to take part in the voluntary optimization of class structure. Well, the education now on the voluntary optimization of class structure, the former Secretary for Education and the colleagues pulled effort together, and education is not a commercial behavior. It is about development of students and instilling positive values and attitudes in students. Humanistic values is more important than cost or price. And schools have their unique contribution and values. And the new academic structure is more difficult than the former Form 4 and Form 5 curriculum. So there is a need to provide better care for our students. We emphasize flexibly adjusting the number of students allocated to each class, and also with supporting measures. We believe that schools should be kept in place to implement their education philosophies, and the teachers and principals should all work together. Why is it that some 200 school principals today have gone outside the electrical building to read out the declaration? I don't have to say much. I believe in our next generation. I hope members could seriously consider this. We should work together. Education Bureau, I don't treat you as my spouse. I treat you as my brother. We should grasp the opportunity to fine-tune our secondary school education for the benefit of our next generation. Next, Ms. Van. Members, fellow colleagues, good morning. In year 2000, the Education Bureau put forward a blueprint for education reform for whole person development. The spirit should be student-based, and in order to implement education philosophies, our teachers have been working very hard for the benefit of our next generation. And they have taken up the role of catering for the needs of different students. They have worked very hard in coming up with different teaching methods and proposals, and after classes they still provide all sorts of supporting measures so as to allow students of different characteristics to excel their potential in order to fulfill the goal of whole person development. However, it's been over a decade since the education reform. The new senior secondary academic structure has been implemented. But this philosophy has yet to be truly implemented. In terms of limited hours of teaching, how can we allow students a suitable learning environment? Teachers understand what is affecting their learning. We believe that at this stage it is appropriate to flexibly adjust the number of students allocated to a class, and it is also a proposal to improve the quality of education. Some parents are concerned that if the number of students allocated to each S1 class is reduced, it will affect them, their opportunities in getting into the schools of their choices. However, despite the reduction in the number of students allocated, the number of schools won't be reduced, and students still have a chance to go in to enter the schools of their choice. And teachers at the same time can implement their education philosophies so that we can provide comprehensive care for our students. More importantly is the fact that they will be given the opportunity to excel and to be equipped so that they have confidence in facing the upcoming challenges and becoming the pillar of our society in the future. I believe that this is the true spirit of putting our students first. Mr. Lee, Chairman, members, good morning. First of all, I'd like to share with you my personal experience. I came from a grassroots family. My parents were were virtually illiterate, and in order to improve my family circumstances, knowledge was important to me. I entered the education sector to contribute to the society. And unfortunately, when I first joined the education sector, the environment was good. I worked in a primary school and secondary school before, and some teachers were forced to participate in the early retirement scheme. When I first joined, because of inadequate number of teachers, the government allowed teachers to stay in their posts up to 68 years old as long as they pass the medical check. Now, I'd like to talk about the succession gap. for students who perform less satisfactorily in terms of their performance and learning, they need more care. However, these schools could not survive, and those teachers gradually lost their posts. Third, I'd like to talk about the problem with parents. Parents have this misunderstanding. They think that with reduction in number of students allocated to the S1 classes, they will be given fewer choices. But in fact, this is not true. On the contrary, students who should not have been lifted up to that band, in the end, entered those schools and the band, and our teachers never give up, and this has brought about instability. And I think the government should bear the responsibility of explaining the situation to parents. Well, it's just like a doctor and a patient. Well, if for a diabetic patient, well, he may suffer symptoms like eye problem and other problems, and the doctor only provides a cure to the symptoms, but not the cause. So this is what the Education Bureau is doing. If they don't solve the problem at root, they're being shameless. I hope that LegCo members can also pay attention to this. Next, Mr. Ho. Chairman, members, school principals, good morning. I'd like to explain why I'm here today. Because I believe in education. I believe in the mission and the ideology of education. I also believe in the joint effort of our sector. The Alliance made a joint declaration and put forward a proposal. This has come by after extensive consultation in the sector and detailed deliberations. I want to emphasize that we're not trying to save our jobs or our benefits or even schools. We're just trying to help students, our education system as a whole, and also act in the interest of our students. Well, if the criterion for approving S1 classes is lowered but not the number of students allocated, the situation will become polarized. Number of teachers will be fewer, and then the education sector will be subject to huge pressure, resulting in the deterioration in the quality of education. We still remember the disastrous consequences of the education reform. Teenage problems are getting more and more complicated, with more and more challenges coming from the moral and national education. Declining student population should be a golden opportunity for improving the quality of education. It can also be a catastrophe for us. Hong Kong's achievements relied on the joint efforts of schools and teachers. Is the outcome of collective wisdom of schools in Hong Kong. When schools schools development complement Education Bureau's policies, we can make progress. Otherwise, we will remain stagnant. The Alliance and the school councils formed the alliance. It was unprecedented, and today over 200 school principals and representatives are here to speak up for the education sector. So what are the problems? We should do some soul searching. We have reached a critical stage. I urge the government to believe in schools, teachers, school principals, and the passion of our educators, and to genuinely listen to the views of educators. Thank you. Next, Ms. Yang. Thank you. It is the government's responsibility to do population planning, and in terms of the demographic changes, the government should deploy to come up with flexible policies, and the government should not shift the blame to schools so that schools are subject to a lot of worries and pressure. Just like today, some 200 school principals and the Secondary Schools Alliance and School Principals Alliance had lengthy meetings on this issue, and some teachers had to go about advocating this issue. We don't want to see that. We want school principals to be school principals and teachers to be teachers. Number of students allocated to each S1 class should be flexible, and the criterion for approving S1 classes should be relaxed to stabilize the teaching force. Next, Ms. Chung. Thank you, Chairman. I have 3 aspirations. First, I hope that the administration, whatever the circumstances are, should give priority to the concerns of our schools and educators. First, in terms of the differences in students under the new senior secondary academic structure, students' need for development is getting more and more complicated. And with labeling effect and the increasing workload on teachers, students and schools and teachers are subject to unnecessarily huge pressure. It's very unfair to teachers, and it's very frustrated to see the measures rolled out by the Education Bureau. Thirdly, I don't think one single policy can resolve all these issues. Joint efforts is required. At the same time, I will not rule out the feasibility of any particular measure. We must analyze the situation and pour our heart and make effort. The government should make use of the opportunity of decline in population to reduce the number of students per class and work together with frontline educators in order to provide quality and forward-looking education to our young people. Next, Mr. Lee. Chairman, members, fellow educators, good morning. Well, in the beginning, Mr. Eddie Ng, our Secretary for Education, said that the measures are aimed at stabilizing the teaching force and avoiding drastic changes. Well, in some ways, the Permanent Secretary shared the views of many principals. However, the methods adopted were very different. If according to the measures, Secretary think that only 5 schools will close down, this is not the true picture. Well, as PS has said, even schools with 1 class can survive, but we understand that the devil is in the details. And in order to achieve that, schools will be subject to our schools or teachers will be subject to very special review and will be subject to huge competition. Flexible number of students per class will be able to stabilize the current situation, or is it just a measure of expedience? 30 students per class, I personally don't think it's a small class at all. It can't be regarded as small class teaching. Any teacher who has taught in AL classes will understand that the standard class size is 30 students. And actually, schools have been asking for more resources to do students grouping. In fact, we know that with smaller classes, teachers will be able to perform better. Shouldn't we appreciate the professional judgment of teachers? We know that we have quality school principals here. We have the quality to make professional decisions. In terms of actual experience, members should take note of these two things. We're seeing more and more students with special needs, and the large number of students per class is detrimental to that. And secondly, teachers will get busier because of the new academic structure. The only problem is that teachers won't be able to teach all the students because the teachers are too busy. In the past, there were floating class, so teachers would be able to take up more. But now, with the kill school policy, what would happen? Next deputation, Mr. Lau. Thank you. Today, when I came, my fellow colleagues told me to share their concerns to members, including the killing school policy. I recall that when I was a teacher, the school principal told me that the student population would increase, and I should stay there because I would have a good prospect. However, the following year, I was the first one to be laid off, and the school was finally closed down. I understand from the administration's papers that the calculations were very complicated. So with the closure of primary schools, we have reached this stage, and the calculations could be wrong very easily. And I think that the government has done a good job last time, since including measures like reducing the number of students per class from 30 to 25 since 2006-07. However, in 2007, the administrative measure was implemented, and the number of students allocated to each S1 class was gradually reduced by 2 per year, followed by a fine-tuning measure. So if in 2006, if the measure of relaxing the criterion for approving classes had been successful, why had the government further introduced the measure in 2007 to reduce the number of students allocated to each S1 class? I believe that all the three policies complemented each other.
The Education Bureau has always emphasized that because of financial reasons, they do not support 321 proposals, small class proposal, or any other proposals. Then I would like to ask, since 2007, how much public money has they spent on policies? Can they explain to us so that we get better understanding of the reasons the Education Bureau has? For me, education is an investment. If we do it right, and if we can provide a good learning environment, a stable environment for students to learn and teachers to teach, is it a worthy investment? The Bureau always says they're concerned that parents would object to the allocation, but we think that we should support parents. Sorry, your time is up. Members, the first session was scheduled to end at 10:40, but we agreed previously that we will not take questions. But I'd like to ask the Secretary, The deputations have spoken, and would you give at least a brief reply? Of course, keep it to within 5 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. I thank the many principals, representatives for their views. They have very good experience, past experience to share. I just want to emphasize once again that when I mention about prevention of capabilities, schools, and teaching posts, I was serious. We have actually sat together and discussed about ways to preserve teaching posts and schools, so that the meetings of today and tomorrow is very important. But I'd like to supplement student-teacher ratio. At the moment, it's 15.3 to 1. If you look at Taiwan, 15 to 1, Singapore 16.1 to 1, Korea 18.2 to 1, Japan 13.2 to 1. Secondary school class size, the average number of students in a class, at the moment it stands at 34. But the actual situation is about 33.4. Taiwan is 32.7, which is better than Hong Kong. Singapore 36.6, Korea 34.3, Japan 32.9. I'm not saying whether these figures are right and wrong. It's only for your reference value. We'll continue to listen to views. Well, we have overrun, so this session ends. Thank you for attending. If you have further comments to make, you may do so by submission. Thank you. The next session will begin in 10 minutes.